Welcome back, everybody. Here we are on the Business Roundtable podcast. I'm your host, David Carr of Steward Your Business, where I help business owners and their teams bring their teams together to accomplish great things. I've got a brand new guest here. I'm super excited to have Rocky Lalvani on. Rocky and I had met actually last week, and we've connected on LinkedIn, and we have a lot of shared connections. And he brings a whole nother dynamic that I don't do. I focus on the people side, and Rocky is all about being profitable and making sure that you have a profitable business. And then we're going to get into some specifics here in this episode, because I work with a lot of clients and it's challenging times to run a profitable business. So Rocky, I would love to have you just I'm giving you a brief introduction, but I'd love to hear a little bit more your background, where you're coming from, and welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And
Yes.
I will say this, the one thing I'm not is the people person. I'm the numbers guy.
Yep.
Give me a
Yep.
spreadsheet. Let me look at the numbers. The numbers will tell me the story that we can then go have the conversation with the people about.
Yep.
But trying to manage people is not my thing at all. And I realize that, and I think people need to realize, what are you good at? What do you love doing? What do you not like doing? Get someone else to do the parts you don't like to do.
Right.
Because if you put me in charge of people, it would not be pretty. You put me in charge of numbers, we're going to make lots of money.
There you go.
Right? It's that simple. So do what you love and figure out that perfect fit for you, and understand what your skills are. And the same thing for your people, right? We always say, and I know you've got the traction book behind you as well. We want the right people in the right seats who want to do the work and have the capabilities. And that's going to show up on the P&L. I'm going to see your numbers, and I'm going to see how efficient your people are and how that's all working. And then we can also talk about when is the appropriate time to hire people, or when is the appropriate time to outsource people or create that mix. Because I think too often people do the field of dreams. They build it hoping they will come. And then you're negative on your numbers. And the question is, do you have enough money to survive until they show up?
Yeah. No, I mean, this is really important. I literally got a call right before this. I was talking to the president of a company, and he's a strategic visionary guy, amazing. But some of the parts, and he has to know the numbers. But we were talking about, like, oh, I was getting out of the budget, some of the things, because it's just really draining. Because he's like, I'm the visionary guy. I'm like, I have to do this. So it's like understanding, like, and then we were talking about, like, doing things on your team that was like, I shouldn't be doing some of these things. So you're right, Rocky. It's like really getting people in the right place in your focus, and know that. And that's why we have people like you, Rocky, on the Business Roundtable, because we want to have other business owners and leaders understand, who can I rely on? Who can I talk to? Who can be a trusted strategic advisor to me in areas that I'm not as strong on or further along on the journey, right?
So I'm the integrator numbers guy who knows how to put an anchor on a visionary by showing them the outcome. I say, based on what you're telling me and what your goals are, here's the math and here's the outcome. Are you okay with this outcome? And a lot of times they'll look at that and go, no, that's not worth it. Like, okay. Or other times I'd be like, you got these 6 ideas. This one is the one where you work the least and you make the most. See, I don't believe in grinding it out. I'd rather work as little as possible and make as much as possible. Sorry, I'm lazy. I'm okay with it.
Work smarter, not harder, right?
Yeah. And that's the key. And you can do that when you have objective, real measurements to be able to do that. And, we say judge by results. Sometimes they're harsh, but they should always be fair.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, I mean, judge the results. What are you trying to achieve here? What's your desired outcome? And then you said, you can run the numbers. One of the things just jumping into some of the challenges that I'm seeing, particularly in the AEC industry that I work with, is like you said, Rocky. Um, Obviously, cash flow is a huge one. Getting paid on time. When do I? There's a lot of things here. Like, when do I hire the right people? When do I bring them on? Right. I've noticed, for example, a lot of them struggle with accurate forecasting. Like, Rocky, meaning like, how am I going to hire the right people, right, and have the cash flow to support those people? When do I know to toggle that? What would you say to a business owner that's like, what they should be looking at? Like, it's like you said, hiring is a good example of a challenge that we see, you know.
Well, so I think the first thing is create a forecast. Not everyone does.
Mm-hmm.
But B, I want to know the numbers behind the forecast. So
Mm-hmm.
if you tell me you're going to have 5 million in revenue, okay. What's your average contract? It's $5,000. Well, if it's the average contract's $5,000, you got 5 million in revenue. I don't know what that's like,
Yeah.
what, 1,000 customers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're going to have 1,000 customers, how many do you have today? 200? Well, how are we going from 200 to 1,000?
Yep.
Like, what is the plan to do that? Oh, we're gonna put out a marketing program, and we'll have that in 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Really? Have you ever done that before?
Right.
Do you have a proof? Tell me something. Why are your clients buying from you?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
and and so we want to know that each part of that math equation works, and we
Yep.
do the math to say it's reasonable, unreasonable. A lot of people love to make these big audacious goals.
Yep.
I'll be honest, 99% of the time they don't happen. You
Mm-hmm.
get disappointed. I'd rather have, hey, we've got 200 clients. A reasonable growth for us is maybe 25%, so 50 more people. What marketing has worked in the past? Where can we apply dollars to marketing to get
Mm-hmm.
those types of people? Who are our best clients? Out of those 200, we might find 100 of them are not really that great.
Mm-hmm.
And 100 of them are okay, but 40 of them are phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, who are the 40 that are phenomenal? And did we leave money on the table at $5,000? Could they have paid us 20?
Right.
Oh, so maybe we don't need to work more. Maybe we don't need more clients. Maybe we need to focus on the 40 and find more like the 40 and say goodbye to everyone else. And those
Yeah.
are all the decisions that have to be made. But
Mm-hmm.
that's what the anchor does. They go, hey, let's actually, before we move, pick the right course, check
Mm-hmm.
the weather,
Yep.
right? And part of that is your cash flow. Plan out the cash flow, and then we have a strategic point. We need to hire somebody, but in order to hire somebody, we need to hit this milestone.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to do it in 6 months, and in 6 months we sit down and we look, did we hit that milestone? No. But then we're not hiring the person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or 4 months, hey, we hit the milestone early, we got to hire the person. Okay, good. Thumbs up. Let's
Mm-hmm.
go hire the person because you hit the milestone.
Yep.
And it's also understanding. We one of the things we like to look at is labor efficiency,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which is for every dollar in you spend on payroll,
Mm-hmm.
how many dollars in gross profit do you actually get back?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and by knowing that number, we know how efficient your employees as a whole are.
Yeah.
And then if we don't see a great number or we don't have a good benchmark, then we start to work down and say, where is the problem occurring? And then you got to come in and fix the people because
The
that's not my
people,
job.
right?
That's your job.
Yeah, yeah. Other other people. No, you're bringing up some great issues. Actually, I want to dig a little bit more into this
Yeah.
because one of the things I've seen, particularly, I met before, and I work with a lot of small business owners, typically under, probably under 6 or 7 million in annual revenue. Let's just use that as a rough number. And so there's what I found in working with some of these firms. What you said, you just brought up a good point about clients. Um, it have they done an analysis of even the percentage of clients and how much is weighted in, you may have a lot of clients, but maybe that one or two clients is a majority of your income, right? What would happen, right, if that something happens to that client? They lose contracts or whatever, right? Are you looking at those variables and preparing for, like, how do you offset? The market changes, right? There's shift. I was here in California in 2009 when the stock market went down, and a lot of the private projects, those just completely dried up. If you had any of those projects, those contracts just stopped. Everybody just held on to their money, and some companies are like, we just cut, like, our cash flow is cut off. What do we do? Right?
And that happened during COVID for some
Mhm.
companies.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
you have to make quick, efficient decisions in situations like that,
Mhm.
and be able to pivot, because that's what it is. Now, if I see a client and they've only got 2 major customers, the first thing we're gonna focus on is, A, how do we take 2 to 5?
Mhm.
Even if they're not all at the same size, but how do we start building those relationships? Because it might take a year, 2 years, 3 years,
Mhm.
but let's start planting those trees today so that
Mhm.
tomorrow they're built. Don't wait until they leave, because that's difficult.
Mhm.
The second thing is you really need to understand where your client is. So
Mm.
I'm asking my client, "Hey, what are you seeing in your industry? What's going on? What
Mhm.
are your concerns? What's
Right.
on your radar?" Because, for example, let's say I don't deal with private money, but my client is dealing with private money. I want to know what's going on in the private money space.
Yep.
Because if something's going on there in I think you talked architecture,
Yeah.
commercial real estate.
Yep.
I know what commercial office space is doing these days. It
Mhm.
ain't pretty.
Yep.
Knowing that knows where my client is sitting, and it tells me now my risk.
Mhm.
Because if they can't pay you, you're out. And so you've got to be aware of that and
Yeah.
being intentional with that. I think too often, especially visionaries, they close their eyes. They go like this.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so you've got to know that, and you've got to be able to pivot quickly, setting
Yep.
deadlines and saying, "Hey, if the growth doesn't happen or if things aren't happening, what changes do we need to make to people?"
Yep.
And it's always horrible to let people go.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's actually good, especially if they hate their job, right?
Yeah. Right, right. Yeah. I mean, another thing you brought up too in this, and I think this is really important. I feel like when the business owners they're trying to figure out, like you said, they struggle with how to come up with the efficiency of the employee. Like, what's my all of my direct and overhead costs, and what should I charge? Especially because I deal with a lot of consultants, right? What do I charge? What's the markup that I make on said role, right? It sometimes they feel like I feel like they're just guessing on, and what is their standard commercial rates? What do they need to make, like you said, profit, Rocky?
To me, I use markup as a minimum,
Mhm.
but I really don't want to use a markup number
Mhm.
unless you're forced to, because that's your business model. In which case, I'm going to ask you, how do we change your business model where you're actually providing value
Yes.
instead of providing labor?
Mhm.
Because if you're
Mhm.
stuck in a labor situation, you're always going to get squeezed.
Yep.
Whereas if you're
Mhm.
providing value and insights, you can charge 10 times.
Mhm.
And I think it's building your business towards that. Is how
Mhm.
do I change my mindset around it? And
Mhm.
how do I change? Because what's going to happen, your competitor, they didn't look at their financials. They're only at, let's say, half a million bucks,
Mhm.
and they want to grow to a million. So we're going to get 500,000 and we're going to undercut you by 40%. You're going, how are they even staying in business? And the
Right.
reality is they're not. But if you aren't providing value or you're not showing it, if you're in the race to the bottom game, you're
Yes.
screwed.
Yes.
And so I think it's being intentional with that. And
Mhm.
these are not all surprises. Most of this stuff we can predict. I can predict cash flow. I
Mhm.
can predict when a client is going to pay you based on the terms you gave the client.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
did you turn into a bank and forget you were a bank?
Right.
Right? Like
Mhm.
these are all things. And you can even look at a client and say, how does that client normally pay?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
how do I also structure my payments to protect myself? So some people are billing, let's say, over a project,
Mhm.
right? It may be a
Yep.
percentage up front and then different milestones.
Yep.
Are the milestones dependent on you? Are the milestones dependent on the client?
Mhm.
Are the what happens when the client doesn't do their part so that you can hit the milestone? And
Yep.
you were expecting the money and you've got the employee there and they're dragging the boat, like
Mhm.
changing your contract. And then one of the things we like to do, which is super powerful, is the last payment should be very minuscule.
Mm. Mm.
Because if things get caught up or they're arguing or they're in trouble or they don't, they change direction even though, you're 89% through the project.
Yeah.
If you've got to walk away at the end and you lose 5%, you're like, "You know what? Cut the loss, move along."
Yeah.
If
Right.
you end the project and half of your billing is out there, you're like, "Oh my god," and then it becomes this battle.
Mhm. No, that's a great point. I think you hit on a couple things that are really important. Look at your contracts. I remember one company I was with, Rocky, um, switching to having an upfront like retainer deposit, which was never done before. To what you're saying, it was a revolutionary thing. We would ask for 30 to 50% upfront, especially if it was a new client, never worked with them before. To your point, because then you have got cash flow now to sustain you, and then that goes to that final payment, like you said at the end. And what was surprising is there wasn't much pushback when we actually put that in people were like, I mean, some people would push back a little bit, but some of them were like, "Oh, I guess that's what it costs to work with you. Okay." That's all it was. That's all it took. You know?
I want a business where money is coming in before money is going out.
Mhm.
But and be very careful on this. Some business owners spend money that's coming in that they haven't
Mm.
earned.
Yes.
So we don't do that. So it's okay to get money up front.
Just
You gotta actually earn it though to spend it.
absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's super important. You can't rob Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, right? Do not do that. You'll find yourself in a hole real quickly, you know? The other thing you mentioned, and I don't see this as I see this occasionally. I particularly have seen this and I do a lot of work too, Rocky, with clients that are work in the public sector. And so again, sometimes it's harder to negotiate those contracts. But again, just being aware, a lot of those times, like you said, the milestone was a big one that I saw mistakes being done, or it wasn't clear. And I think, you know, if it's open ended, you brought this good point. It's like, who is this dependent upon? Because you could get yourself in a real bind. Is like we don't agree on what the milestone is. So now we've entered into a contract, right? We're supposed to do the work, and now we can get hit up for non-performing work. Hey, you're violating the terms of the contract. And you're just like, but I need to be paid to get so you're in a real challenge, right? A real bind. If you're not careful.
The other half of that is scope creep, going the
Yep.
opposite way. Oh, well, can you do this and this and this too? And
Mm-hmm.
just because it's easy for you
Yep.
doesn't mean you should do it for free.
Mm-hmm. I
So,
think that Rocky is both. I mean, that's where I come in with your side of it and the people side, because I work with a lot of project managers, right? Because they want to please the client, right? They want to like, I don't
well,
want to make it.
but let me ask you a question,
Yeah.
right? Your project manager is managing the project,
Mm-hmm.
but the employee is dealing with the client and doing the work. And they're like, can you do this, this, and this? Does the employee even know what scope is?
Great question.
Right? Do they know what's extra? Do they
Mm-hmm.
know what to say in that situation? Have you
Mm-hmm.
trained them to say, Let me check with the project manager and I'll get back to you on that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Instead of saying, sure, I'll do that. Hey, they get paid a salary. What do they care?
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't know. Your employees, chances are not financially savvy.
Mm-hmm.
They have no idea how you make profit.
Right.
They don't know what gross profit is. All they know is, hey, you got $1 million contract and I'm only making 100 grand.
Mm-hmm.
They don't realize that, there's 12 of them and
Yeah.
then there's the overhead and
Yep.
then, this, that, and everything else that goes with it. So you got to train all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to show them, and you've got to create safeguards so that those people know what to do in those situations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, very true. And it's in my experience, Rocky, it's not a one time. It's like, hey, we're gonna have a project management class one time. Here's all the things you need to know. It's like this is not a. It's an ongoing thing, right? Of learning, education, understanding. Um, you know, to me, it was my eyes were open. I think what for as a project manager, Rocky, when like you said, coming in and then saying like, hey, here's the milestones that we're shooting for. You have to be really clear. What's the profitability we're looking at? What are the what you know what how are we staying in budget? All of these things. And so when I my feet had to be held to the fire and I had to report to that, that was like, oh man, I'm gonna I better better. Yes, but if you don't have those clear metrics, or how do you get to them? That's one thing I've found, Rocky. What's your experience here? Because sometimes companies, you know, let's just uh, they use it's not clear. Their financial software is just hard to get to. It's hard to understand, hard to see. They're not running reports. They're not getting clear. So how do
Ah,
yeah.
so there's two different accounting systems a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times. There's their actual accounting system where the accounting is taking place.
Yep.
But then there might be another accounting system, which is the people management system. So, for example,
Mm.
we have a project. When we bid the project, we thought it would take 100 hours.
Mm-hmm.
20 of this, 40 of that, 30 of this, 10 of that. Are you measuring the actual time of the people on that project? And is it in line with budget? Are they over budget, under budget? Is there efficiency there?
Mm-hmm.
And did we actually properly bid this to begin with?
Right.
And if you don't know all of those things, then that's a problem. Now,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of software that people will use to track that part of it. And so, what you've got to do is take the data from there and grab the things. And then you've got to add the financial data on the other side to put it together to
Yep.
say, hey, here's what the time was. Now we've applied the cost and we've applied our overhead and we've applied this, that, and the other thing. And now we know this project was or wasn't profitable.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can also understand why, so that the next time we go into a project, that, and for me, depending on the client and what they're doing, how much of it is standardized and how much is custom, and are
Mm-hmm.
you taking that into are you clear with that? I'm
Mm-hmm.
surprised how many people have a lot of standardized stuff that they do custom, meaning they don't actually have blocks to put the stuff in, so that if you're doing repetitive stuff or there are
Yep.
repetitive blocks,
Mm-hmm.
then you should have that all systematized. And the other thing is laying out the entire project
Mm-hmm.
with the milestones and tracking each part of the milestones. You're going to start to see which people are rowing and which people are anchors.
Yes. I mean, so it's interesting you say this, Rocky, because a company I worked with previously, um, they were using a software. Basically, it was there's different versions, but I think you're bringing up a good point. I've worked with different kind of enterprise resource planning software over the years. In fact, I was a user group leader here in Southern California for one called Deltek. They had Vision and Azure I've used. Anyway, it doesn't really matter the particular one, but what I hear you say is so important, Rocky. Sometimes the business owners, I've heard them just using, like, let's just use QuickBooks, but they're not using the project management aspect of it. They're just using the, like you said, the accounting side, which is great. It's helpful. But if and I work with a lot of project based, environmental consulting is project based. So we're not selling, widget, like, physical things. It's our labor, our deliverables. That's what that is the product. So if you're not, like you said, Rocky, if you're not clear on that, how do you break that? I don't know. Sometimes people don't even have what I call a work breakdown structure. Like, how are you? Is this just a big lump thing? How are we understanding this? Like you said, and so it's a
Right.
big ball of yarn. Like, how do I detangle this? you know?
And I know this sounds complicated, but more often than not, when you just break it down to simplicity, it becomes easy. And then with experience, you will constantly adjust. So in the beginning, we're going to guess, and
Mm-hmm.
then we're going to test and see how true were we. And if
Mm-hmm.
things are way off, it's a question of how did we get way off?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we prevent that in the future? This is
Mm-hmm.
constant evolution. You're constantly evolving, and I think the biggest problem, especially for small businesses and even big businesses, because we'll talk about the other half of
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah,
You have
absolutely.
disparate systems,
Mm-hmm.
and if you don't have a way to take the information from all these different systems and have one clear dashboard, which is what we create for people, one
Mm-hmm.
clear dashboard that shows you, are your systems running thumbs up or thumbs down?
Mm-hmm.
Because as long as they're running thumbs up, I don't have to dig. When they
Right.
go thumbs down, I have to go dig.
Mm-hmm.
But you need a good, clear, proper dashboard to tell you things are thumbs up or thumbs down and how it's going down to the employee level. The other thing is, and I see this a lot with larger companies, whatever the metric is that you want, people will give it to you,
Mm.
especially if they're logging things into systems. When it
Mm-hmm.
comes to white collar time tracking, they're going to do what you ask them to do. And if you don't measure to say, hey, you were supposed to do this in 10 hours, there's 42 hours billed to it.
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
Mm-hmm.
And you're the people guy, so you know this. I would
Yep.
bet you that your biggest thankers are the sweetest, nicest people. Right? Where the guy you hate who drives you up the wall is actually the one who did the 10 hours of work in 4 hours because they're actually getting crap done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a good. I mean, I wouldn't say always, but it could be. You have certain people that are more object oriented, task oriented. You have more people that are more just there that they can spend time. In fact, I was talking to a client about this yesterday. If you're not, because this is a common thing I've seen in delegation too, Rafi, like, hey, just get it done. And they're not clear, like you said earlier. They're not clear on the scope. How much time do I have? And the project manager, they may actually know they could get it done. Like you said, it's a 4-hour task, and maybe they even budgeted 6 hours because they're like,
You
and
have
that
to.
I'm gonna get it done, right? I can get it in 4 hours, but they don't tell the person, hey, this is the task, get it done, and then they spend 10 hours. They're like, well, you didn't tell me. Like, I just kept working on it, and I felt like I could keep working on it, right? Well, yeah, we only have this much time. It's not like unlimited, Well, I could want to work on this a little bit more, and I could do this with this. I'm like, we're not looking for perfection here. No, I
No,
mean,
I people are very good at being busy.
mm-hmm,
Everyone today is busy. That's
mm-hmm,
wonderful. Are you productive?
yep,
I don't
yep,
care that you're busy.
mm-hmm,
I'd rather you be less busy and think more and build out systems and processes.
yep,
And every business can have systems and processes. And I
right,
think a lot of people don't want to build them because they
yep,
take time and they're no fun. Um, but at the end of the day, that's what makes you profitable. Your
mm,
should be a well-oiled machine, and
right,
you should be irrelevant as the business owner in the
mm,
daily operations.
mm-hmm,
That's when value goes up, fun goes up, and you get to have fun and enjoy the fruits of your labor. If
Right.
that's not the case, then we've got operational problems, and I can tell you the numbers, but David's gonna have to fix the people.
Yeah. No, you bring up some good points here. There's like this evolution that I see, especially with small business owners, particularly, and I see it a little bit in the maybe $2 to $3 million in annual revenue. They're still very involved with the business, but like you said, you've got to continually step back, and that's hard for them to separate themselves from the business. At least I've seen that, and get a little bit more objective, like you said. And what I found, Rocky, is they're doing so much in the business. It's like there's I don't know, maybe you can speak a little bit to the mindset and this profit first, this idea of profit first, and they're going in there, and so they can't even see it like how to be more profitable. They don't even think like, I don't want to quote unquote spend money on developing processes or systems. They don't see that as an investment, or why I don't want to use this third, the software like you talked about, maybe this accounting, the project management based software, which will actually help them in the long run, but they don't see the value in investing and how that contributes to their ultimately being more profitable.
I think part of it is the 1 to 3 million range is what I call the trap.
Mm-hmm.
In that range, you're small enough that the business owner is still wearing a lot of hats because they don't have enough revenue to fill all the seats.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a struggle at that point. Um, they still they're now starting to experience all of the problems because things that were little, when you were at half a million have now, at 3 million, they're 6 times the problem. And it's 6 times 6. So it's actually 36 times the problem or even more. And I think they don't know where to start or they get
Mm-hmm.
overwhelmed. And they're like,
Right.
I can't do anything. You know what? You almost got to let the business burn at that point. You got to
Mm-hmm.
you got to let the emergencies just kind of burn out,
Mm-hmm.
and you've got to step back. The biggest thing we tell business owners is, what do you love and what do you hate? And
Mm-hmm.
let's start with the hate. Because whatever you hate doing, whatever drains you, you are not going to do. So
Yes.
that's the first place we're going to start getting people who love what you don't like
Mm-hmm.
and start putting him into those seats. And today, more than ever, there's tons of what we call fractional help,
Yep.
where you can hire great talent for a fraction of the money to help you get through these things or to help you do this until you get to that point where you can actually hire a person to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I don't think people realize that there are that help is available.
Yeah.
Um, and when you actually start to compare the cost of having a full-time person to that, it's like a no-brainer
Yep.
decision, right? It's an
Yep.
easy decision. Plus, if you don't like the way it's going, it's an easy cord to cut,
Yeah.
right? No offense,
Right.
but
Yeah.
hey,
Absolutely.
this didn't work. Bye.
Yep.
Like
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it's easier emotionally to do that for
Mm-hmm.
whatever reason. I
Yeah.
think it's harder when you've got people there permanently all the time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You feel like that's a big burden. I mean, they always say, hiring your first employee, right? It's like, oh man, I got this burden, and you think, as much as the best employee, you think that they're going to care as much as you are, and it's just not. It's just not, right, Rocky? I mean, it's just, I mean, they care, but it's ultimately it's a job for them. You know, it's not their business. Um, you know, um, and this is something I see a business owner struggle with too, Rocky, as far as like retaining people and what does that look like, and trying to, I mean, number one, I want to go back to just, I agree. That's what I'm, a fractional chief people officer, if you will, coming in there, and I realize that with a business owner, because yeah, if you have to commit payroll every month, benefits, all of this stuff, it's a heavy burden. Um, and so if you have that flexibility, financial flexibility to kind of turn it on and off, be wise about that. But don't be foolish in that, like you're saying, find the things that you hate and bring in those that will help you so you can focus on where you're going to have the most impact, right? Most effectiveness.
And part of the thing with building systems, so I'll give you an example. Email. We all deal with email.
Mhm.
My first thought was they're like, hire a VA to do your email.
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, I'm going to hire a VA to do my email. So before I hired a VA, the first thing I said is, well, what am I going to tell the VA to do? How are they going to sort this? So I started looking at my email and I'm like, this is all crap. I'm not paying somebody money to look at crap.
Yep.
And I actually found a different way to do it, that I use technology to auto sort my email.
Mhm.
And I think I pay $20 a month. I'm not going to
Mhm.
get a VA for $20 a month, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so the first thing is, wherever possible, systematize.
Mhm.
Only after systematization do we bring in people to run the system.
Mhm.
And I think that's a big part of the key. And the reality is no one's going to do it as well as you.
Yep.
That's just life,
Yep.
and it's okay. But it's also finding the right people. If you hire the wrong people, the cost of that is massive. And
Yep.
I think what a lot of small business owners think is, if I just pay them more,
Yep. Yep.
and that never works. Like, I mean, unless you're way out of appropriate,
Yeah.
paying more. Actually, I can't tell you how many business owners were like, my people are doing so well. We're doing well. I'm going to give them bonuses. And so they started handing out bonuses. And 3 months later, they're like, I don't know what happened, but my people all went south. And
Mm.
I think it has to do with intrinsic versus extrinsic
Mm.
motivation, which is not
Mhm.
my place. That's
Yeah.
yours.
Yep. Yep.
And, and, money doesn't always solve problems. Sometimes it creates them.
Yes, yes. No, you're right. It's understanding your team. What's the culture you're trying to create? Because this is one you and I talked about before we the podcast here. Because there's this culture issue you got to address in the company, and like you said, money is not it. And one of the challenges, particularly here in California, where I'm at, is we have companies that hire employees. California is big on employees versus independent contractors. Now, and for those that you don't know, that independent contractors are going to be able to have a higher rate because they have to have a higher burden of themselves that they've got to carry. But what you have is this weird dynamic where you have a company that have both, or they hear people in the marketplace, and so you have an employee that's like, how come they're making twice what I'm making hourly? Well, it's because you're an employee, not an independent contractor, right? And so there's a bit of education too. I found, at least, Rocky, particularly for employees and new people new to maybe consulting. They don't understand all, like you said earlier in the podcast, all the things that the business owner has to cover: payroll, taxes, all benefits, all of these things. They have no concept of this, right? No literacy even about that.
No, and I think one of the things I tell business owners is, see what you can do to up the financial literacy of your employees. And I
Mm,
know, oh, but that's not my job. I know it's not your job, but here's the thing. If your employees are financially struggling at home, even if they're making six figures, then they're going to struggle at work,
mhm.
right?
Yep.
And if they can't afford the new tire for the car, then they're not showing up. And if they're
Mhm.
not doing the right financial things, it's causing stress at home, which is going to
Mhm.
bring stress into the work.
Mhm.
And these are the types of things that you've got to look at to say, hey, how do we teach our people to be more financially savvy? Because
Mhm.
at the end of the day, if they're more financially savvy, they'll bring that financial savvy into your business, and they
Yes.
can help you with those questions. They do start to understand the costs and all these things involved, and then they
Mhm.
start to make better decisions.
Yeah. I mean, it is, there's a whole host of ways you can educate them. I mean, something as simple as, like, for example, Rocky, uh, charging even just 15 minutes to a project versus just putting it in an overhead category. It's like, because they're like, well, it's just easier for me to lump it into an overhead category because it's like, but it really is project related and documentation. And so there's 15 minutes, that's one person, but you multiply that across multiple people, like you talked about earlier, like how, what's our uh, effectiveness in bringing in revenue to the company, and just having them be advised of that. And then what I found, Rocky, like you're talking about, is like what motivates them. So like that, they're like, that doesn't motivate me putting that, but I'm like, hey, if you want to get this professional course or go travel to this location and that would be meaningful to you, that by doing this enables the company to provide that benefit to you, right?
It does, and you have to look at individual people's utilization, because
Mhm,
overall, let's just say your goal is 80% and you're at 70%.
mhm,
Most people are just going to go yell at everybody.
mhm,
And you're like, wait a minute, dig in.
mhm,
Oh, four people are at 82% and one's at 32.
mhm,
Go deal with the 32 and fix that and stop bothering the people who are doing it right.
mhm. And you need systems to be able to do that analysis, right? You need to be able to go through and look at that on a regular basis, like just you're very much, Rocky, or one group is very like utilized, and why is that? And I found this too, even in larger companies too, Rocky. I've worked in your US huge engineering firm. You know that you have to look at all these different areas, because you may have one division that's super utilized, almost overutilized, and they're like, yeah, one that's just because of whatever contracts or whatever is not currently available. It's like, how do we shift the work? Like, let's try and find some. It's like, I like the stock market. What is that? The rebalancing, right? you know, of like looking at your contracts, looking at your clients, looking at these things. Where do we shift within the company? Where does it make sense to maybe, move management of a particular contract or client, right? Within the organization.
And you can't do that on feelings. You got to
Yeah.
do that based on the numbers. And at the same point, if you look at employees, certain employees like stability, certain
Hmm.
employees like flexibility. They like hopping from job to job and
Hmm.
handling problems. Know
Yep.
who's what so that you can move them around appropriately instead of putting people in places they don't want to be,
Mm.
because just like you, they're not going to do it well.
Yeah.
And now our efficiency numbers drop.
That I've seen that happen a lot in the environmental consulting industry. That's my background, Rocky, where you have people that are technical specialists. They do very well in the technical work, and then they're saying, "Well, manage projects or manage people now because you're and they struggle, Rocky. They struggle. They're with
Well,
their and then and the team, right?
and I think this is where companies get it wrong. Like if you've got people who are great at sales, they go, "Oh, let me put you in sales management."
Right.
"Oh, you're great at technical. Let me put you in technical management."
Mhm,
Just because you're good at doing it doesn't mean you're good at managing it.
mhm,
And back to your specialty, if they're not good at managing people, then you've put the wrong person in the wrong seat. And
mhm,
you have to realize that. And I think too often, so I used to coach soccer when my kids were young. And the
mhm,
biggest thing I learned, like the kids would tell me where they wanted to play.
mhm,
And my other coaches were much more technical coaches, right? Oh,
mhm,
he's really good at this, so let's put him there.
mhm,
And I would ignore both of them. What I would do is I would just watch what happened on the field.
mhm,
And this kid's like, "Oh, I want to play up front." And yet he was always in the back. And
mm,
this kid's like, "Oh, I want to play defense." Or I want to play here. And yet he was always playing there.
mhm.
And so what I would do, I wouldn't even tell them their new titles, right? I would just go, "Okay, you, and you go." And I knew that they would naturally end up where I needed them to be. So I needed to match all the people up at
Mhm,
a given point, knowing this group is going to work together and this group's not, like certain kids aren't going to pass to certain kids.
mhm.
So there's no use putting them out there together, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
Yep.
team A, this is team B.
Yep.
And learning how to to play the the thing and be able to do that. And it's amazing what happens and
Mm-hmm.
how they come together. And then everyone being clear on who does what when.
Right.
So in the game of soccer, right? The game is constantly moving except when the whistle blows. The
Mm-hmm.
whistle blows because the ball goes out. Then the
Right.
kids are arguing, "Well, I wanna throw it in. No, I'm like, "No, no, no. This is the rule on who throws it in." And
Mm-hmm.
then it's like, "Who's that?" And then they immediately know, "Oh, that's his. Boom." And they move, at that moment. And the other thing that happened, what we taught them was when the whistle blows, what does everyone do? They stop.
They just stop. Yeah.
They stop. We taught our kids when the whistle blew, you come alive. And
Mm.
in that fraction of a second, when everyone else has got their back turned and stopped, you attack.
Mm.
And so it's understanding these dynamics of how
Mm-hmm.
things work and how things go together and observing them.
Yep.
And then and I'm not the people person. Remember that? And
Yep.
I
Yep.
could figure this out. Um, and I didn't try and change people. I
Yeah.
couldn't.
Yeah.
I just said, "Hey, this is the way they're gonna behave. I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
build a behavior system that fits the behaviors."
Yep. No, it's so important. I was working with a client just to this point, Rocky, where I had somebody that is very much a people person, very much step by step. Um, Great. He was running with field operations, if you will. Did really great on that, and he was doing well. And then he was asked to by this the manager that I'm working with, asking him to work on some proposals, right? But the proposals are they're not formulaic, okay? They're not formulaic. These are custom ones. They require nuance. And so when he asked him to do these things, he wasn't getting what he wanted from this gentleman because this gentleman needed to have all the steps lined out. He was very formulaic. He would do very well in implementing, but he was being asked to come up and put a proposal together and get it out to his client in a timely manner. And he didn't do all of it, not because he didn't care. He just he took it to where he didn't have comfort with it. It wasn't his sweet spot. And so sometimes what I say is we're thinking these people have achieved a level of success in one area of the business, and so we just think, oh well, then they should just naturally be able to do these other areas, and they become frustrated. Like to your point, you were saying, like, well, why don't they just get it? I get it, but they don't process information like you, and that's not what motivates them, right?
Or I need somebody there, so I'm gonna stick the body
Yes.
there, whether it's the right or wrong body. And
Right.
then we wonder why,
Mhm.
these things happen. And again, all of this stuff shows up on the P&L, but
Mhm.
it takes a lot of digging to figure out where that's happening and so forth. It takes eyes to watch and to see and to be able to do that. And
Mhm.
you got to make the time to do. I mean, I think the business owner doesn't realize their job is to watch all of this, not to
Yeah.
actually do anything.
Mm.
Um and that's kind of the key. And I think too often owners are trying to do the work when things
Yep.
fall apart
Yes. Yes.
instead of sit back and let the team do the job. We interfere too often.
Yeah.
And that causes all kinds of problems beyond, like, those. That's your
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
I just see the end result, less money and frustration and all of that.
Well, one of the things, you made this really powerful comment earlier on in the podcast talking about when letting things burn. An example that I've seen is where the client is so focused on bringing in, I would say, probably more revenue. Like I got to bring in more projects. I got to bring in more work, right? They don't have, they have kind of, maybe they have an idea, but they don't have like you've said, a broken down system where with you, Rocky, where we're going through all the numbers, looking at the clients, which ones are profitable, all of that stuff you talked about earlier. They're just like, I got to bring in more projects. And so they're bringing in more projects, they're putting more pressure in the system. And what have seen at least is then you've got a team and they're just feeling overloaded of like, I'm another missed deadline, because I'm getting all these things because I feel like they're like, we got to feed the system, and you're overloading the system. you know?
Revenue is vanity.
Mm,
Profit is sanity, and cash flow is reality, because you can be profitable and out of cash. And I think
mm,
that really blows business
mm,
owners' minds, is the fact that, hey, my accountant said I'm profitable and there's no money in the bank.
mm,
Well, depending on how you do your accounting, it's probably because your customer never paid you. Um,
mm,
you sent the invoice, so it said you invoiced this, but nobody was paying attention to whether it was actually coming in. And
yeah.
so understanding the movement of cash through the business, and understanding it goes back to, again, if you're just driving revenue and it's unprofitable revenue all the time,
Mhm,
you're never going to get out of the hole. I don't care if you quadruple or 10 times your business. You're
mhm,
just going to have 100x the headaches, and you're going to wonder, why am I having more and more revenue and less coming home to me? And I see that all the time.
mhm. Yeah, and I see you too, Rocky, and it's frustrating because I'm trying to help the business owners you are. I'm on the people side, you're on the number side. Let's look at the numbers and helping the people, and you know, and then the other thing you said too is that the cash flow side of it. Cash flow is like your lifeblood, and this is where I've seen the profitability shrink. You might have very small margins, let's say 5% or whatever the case might be, and you're not getting paid. Like you said, you're like, hey, revenue, I'm charging, the invoices is going out, right? I'm getting revenue. And I was working at one company where we had, so our payroll was so high at one point we had to take loans out to pay payroll. So we're actually get trading charge interest to pay our employees. Well, what's that interest rate? And what's my profit margin? Yeah. Is it pretty close, 5%, whatever. That there's no profit now.
Yeah.
I've had to
Why are you
borrow money to
working for no
pay,
reason?
right?
And that, here's the dirty truth, that happens more often than you can imagine.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just the reality of it.
Mm-hmm. Right. So if you're not being, like we talked earlier, forecasting, considering all these things, you're like, what what does it benefit you? It's like you said, I like that you said that revenue is the vanity, because a lot of people like to talk revenue.
Yeah.
But what did you actually take? What was the cash you actually took home? What's the profit you actually made in your pocket?
That's what matters. We're
Mhm.
looking at the wrong metrics
Mhm.
throughout the business. And I think that's the problem,
Mhm.
is what are we actually taking home? And that's what I love about Profit First, because with Profit First, the moment a dollar comes in, the first thing we do when the dollar comes in, we put it in our profit account. We
Mm.
take our profit first. This is not evil, right? The
Yep.
purpose of business is to make money. You said you're going to make money. Let's take our profit first. Let's set it aside in our profit account.
Mhm.
And now let's make sure everything else runs. Because more often than not, most business owners are like, well, I got to reinvest in the business. Really? You're going to reinvest? Show me the return on your reinvestment.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, the there is so much more I want to go into with you, Rocky. You've talked about cash flow. You've talked about profit, revenue. You brought up so many great topics here today, and I feel like I'm hoping as everyone's listening to this podcast, you recognize that Rocky's coming on here, dropping a gold here, some just fantastic insights. And the reason why we have this whole Business Roundtable podcast is the opportunity to listen and learn and see, is this somebody that could help me, benefit me? And I can tell you just from what you've been sharing, Rocky, I'm taking gold, and it's helping me affirm and confirm some things that I need to follow up on in my own business, and and working with other clients. And so as we're wrapping up, Rocky, I would love to just, what are if they're listening here, what's the kind of the key takeaways that you want them to, the listeners to hear, that we shared or we talked about today? Like, hey, if you've heard nothing else, just remember this takeaway.
So let's start with, first of all, you've all been given the wrong equation for profit. You're all
Mm,
told sales minus expenses equals profit. which makes profit a leftover. We believe
Yes.
it's sales minus profit equals expenses. You've got to constrain yourself, right?
Mm.
It's just like me and a bowl of candy. If I'm
Mhm.
not constrained, I'm eating a bowl of candy. And you know what? It's not good for me. So let's constrain ourselves with our cash too. And the reality is, your business is a machine. You've got to figure out how your machine works and then put the people in to operate the machine. And at the end of the day, it is supposed to be profitable. And
Mhm.
if you're not generating the profits and the returns that you expect, it's not I'll be profitable when, it's profitable today, then let's chat. Let's fix it. Let's look at
Mhm.
it. In
Mhm.
more often than not, I know we talked about so much stuff and it seems overwhelming.
Yep.
More often than not, a couple of small tweaks create a massive difference. This is
Mhm.
not when you can look at it and go, "Oh, there, that's the problem."
Yep.
And that's what we do. We can cut through all the noise to go, "That. Let's fix
Mhm.
that." And that's where we get the majority of benefit, and then little by little, we'll get the rest of it done.
Yeah. Great insights, Rocky. What's the best way for folks to connect with you, if they wanna learn more?
So I have a podcast, Profit Answer Man. You can listen to what we do numbers wise, much more in depth.
Mhm.
The website is profitcomesfirst.com, and you can find me there. You can email me or connect with me on social.
Mhm.
I'm easy to find.
Yes, yes. I know you and I are connected on LinkedIn. So if you guys are connected with me on LinkedIn, you'll see Rocky there. Um, so grateful to have you, Rocky. Would love to have you back again. It was really awesome having you share your insights, drop this gold here on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for listening in. We appreciate you subscribing. Leave a 5-star review. We love that. We are on all the different platforms. We make this an event on LinkedIn, so it's great to have your comments. I'll share them with Rocky, or Rocky can reply it directly himself. So send in your comments. Your feedback is always welcome. If you're interested in joining us on the podcast, let me know too. We love having guests, and glad to have Rocky here for the very first time. So thanks everybody for listening. Until then, take care, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.